Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Catechumens Depart. I am Eric Anderson. I am an artist, a professional priest botherer, and a parishioner of Father Mark's.
Father Mark Kozak from Assumption of the Holy Virgin Mary in South Philadelphia, and he's never bothered me.
I've bothered priests nationwide.
Never bothered me, never had a problem.
I'm like Columbo. Like, hey, can I ask you a question?
The last question?
The last question? No.
Yeah. I've had people like that. You're not one of them.
Okay.
Believe me.
I got to work on my badgering skills.
There you go.
Thanks for joining us again, guys. We are glad to have you with us. Last time we were talking about the civic religion of America, and we kind of got through a lot of our politics as best we could in a limited time frame, and hopefully didn't go too deep or too controversial with that. I got you a little bit worked up, I think.
Yeah, because you started with the original. We had the original sin question and the fallen man question. And yeah, I got all worked up on that.
As you should. Like that's.
And we should get worked up about.
That's gnarly territory. Yeah.
Because we're 7.5 billion people running around with free will, and we got a problem.
Yeah, we do. Mm-hmm. And if we don't understand like what we're shaped like, that gets ugly.
It can.
It's getting ugly. Well, maybe it's a little calm. I don't know.
It's calmer.
It's calmish. And so we had kind of wrapped up thinking, well, maybe we should talk about crazy stuff like the end of days and rapture and all of that good stuff. I mean, that's pretty heavy metal. But I actually want to like put that to the side for today, simply because today is an interesting feast day. My wife Kim and I are reading this book, which is called Marriage is Path to Holiness. It's the Lives of Married Saints by Drs. David and Mary Ford, who are out at St. Tikhon's. It's been a really fun book for us to read together. Oh, Annie's giving Father Mark a visit. Hi, Annie. Maybe you guys can see her. But anyways, today is the feast day of Saints Nicholas and Alexandra, who are very important in Orthodoxy, especially in the Slavic side of things. The last Tsar of Russia, and I know you know a little bit about Russian history, just a little.
My degree is in Russian history, my bachelor's degree. So yeah.
Oh, I forgot to mute my phone. Telemarketer wants to talk to me. I guess they'll have to wait.
They love us, don't they?
They do. They just want to tell us that. I don't know what. They're not selling long distance anymore, so I don't know what they're
if they wanted to give me money in cash, that would. Well, I'm sorry.
Welcome to the tangential episode of Catechumens Depart. So, well, Father Mark, why don't we have a little story time? Can you just sort of tell us the story of these folks and why they're important and sort of what happened?
Well, it's interesting that they're in the book about marriage. It's strangely enough,
Annie, that's not helpful.
Considering who they were and what kind of life they had and everything else.
She's going to want royalties.
They were relatively good parents. They had a good marriage. They loved each other. They loved their children. They were killed because of their position as last Tsar and last Tsaritsa, and partially because of the faith. You could argue that. But he was really pretty much a failure as a Tsar.
In what way?
As a leader. Well,
I read that he was like really early.
He was really inept. Yeah. And partially it wasn't his fault. Partially it was his father, who Alexander III.
Yeah, how did he come to?
We need to go back a couple of generations here.
Yeah, assume no prior knowledge.
In 1881, Alexander II was killed by one of the nihilists, who's one of the co-conspirators. Name just have to be Yolanov. I don't know if you've ever heard of that name before.
Okay.
That was Lenin's original name. So Lenin's brother was one of the people killed for killing the Tsar.
Okay.
Alexander III went really high and off to the right and had advisors that were like that.
Okay.
But he died of kidney disease in 1894 at the ripe old age of 49.
Mm.
And he should have been Tsar for a lot longer. He was a strong man. He had a head on his shoulders, but he had good relatives.
Okay.
His wife was a Danish princess,
oh.
and she just happened to be the sister of Queen Alexandra of England.
Oh.
So this is when all the royalty in Europe were all related to each other.
Well, it sort of maybe helps you keep from going to war a little bit.
Well, it does, and
it's
it
like,
also
that's my sister's house. Don't
it
blow
also
it up.
sets your priorities if you can, if it works that way.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicholas was raised as Tsarevich. He remembers when his great-grandfather when his grandfather was killed. Not the sharpest crayon in the box, but he had some brains. But he also was a fatalist.
Mm.
And he meets up with the love of his life for the second time, just as his father is dying. And they were married almost right after that, and there were various talks about how, it was bad luck to do that, and so on and so forth, against tradition and so on and all that. Well, they just slept that off, and they ended up having a good relationship. But Nicholas retained some of his father's advisors, and then had a tendency to pick the bad ones. There were some that were good. He had 4 uncles that were major problems in his life. Yeah. One of them married his wife's sister.
Okay.
This proves how incredibly complex this all is. And the reason why she's so important is she was Saint Elizabeth the New Martyr.
Oh.
So we'll talk about her in a little while.
Okay.
The Tsar and the Tsaritsa, Nicholas and Alexandra, became a little bit more insular, a little bit more fanatic as time went on.
Mm.
And they made a number of political errors, even as Tsar and his wife could make. And in the early 1900s, hooked up with a Russian pseudo-faux mystic named Rasputin.
I've heard of that.
Who was not a monk.
Okay. Who was this dude? I've heard of him.
He was a Siberian so-called wise man.
Okay.
He was married with children.
Okay.
He belonged to a old calendarist group that was a real out there in the middle of nowhere crazy group.
Okay.
And
still nominally Orthodox?
Well, or? not much.
Okay.
But he might have had some kind of hypnotic power over some people. Mm-hmm. He sort of wiggled himself into the Russian court and then into the royal family itself and became the advisor of Alexandra and Nicholas, especially about their son, their only son, Alexis, who was a hemophiliac. So Rasputin...
Was there any kind of treatment for that at that point?
Well, there was nothing then, no. Unfortunately, his male relatives all died early, and he was the heir, the only heir of the Tsar.
Okay.
Rasputin had got into the court, and he was a mess. He wasn't educated. He wasn't a courtier. He really barely was Orthodox. but he had some kind of hypnotic. There we go.
Hypnographic
Relationship with the Tsarevich Alexis.
Because like I just thought he was like some sort of like weird wizard or something.
Well, no, he wasn't a wizard. He was a you look at pictures of him and you go like, I wonder if his eyes really look like that. I think his eyes really look like that.
Okay.
Yeah. He was debauched. He was a drunkard. He slept with many women. He was a mess.
Despite his family?
Despite his family living back in Siberia. The Empress Alexandra wanted to have her boy.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
And she went basically off the end with that.
Just because she was desperate for some kind of cure or help.
She was desperate, you know, to have him well. So Nicholas is forced into calling the first Duma, Parliament of Russia since 1613.
Oh.
In 1905.
Why?
The revolutionary underpinnings were falling apart. Economically, they were having major problems. The Industrial Revolution hit Russia last, and it didn't really do well with former serfs, and with they weren't ready.
Okay.
You know, and it was a real mess. Church supported the people mostly. And that didn't go over well with the Tsar too much. There were a few attempts by the Dumas, there were 4 of them, to advise the Tsar, but he had people whispering in his ear all the time and saying, you're the autocrat, you're the Tsar, you shouldn't be listening to these people.
Okay.
They're only peasants and shopkeepers and everything else. Well, they weren't. They were nobility, and they were people that had run the state for the last 300 years.
But prior to that, had it just been the Tsar in charge, and they hadn't been having these Dumas?
Well, there had been some Dumas over the years, but they were called for special events. The last one was called because there was no Tsar,
okay,
and the Poles had invaded Russia. This was in the early 1600s. So to call the Duma was extraordinary. To call 4 of them was extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah.
And the last one to sit, the 4th Duma, was sitting during World War I. The Tsar made an unfortunate error and went out to try to lead the armies himself. Oh. And that was a real disaster since he didn't really know too much about the military. And he ends up abdicating the throne in late February of 1917.
As a result of that?
As a result of that, as a result of the political underpinnings just flew apart. He lost the support of the people, lost the support of the nobility, lost the support of much of his family. So he ends up abdicating.
And were these revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks, and were they fomenting before that?
They were, but not the Bolsheviks yet.
Okay.
But the Mensheviks and the Social Democrats, and these were the people that took over. So there was a provisional government, which semi-worked, except they continued with the war with Germany, which probably was a tactical political error since the Russian army wasn't doing very well anyway. The Tsar was under house arrest in one of the palaces, and the Tsar and his family were being taken care of. But in November of 1917, the provisional government falls apart, and a small group of revolutionaries called the Bolsheviks, led by Mr. Ulyanov, Lenin, takes over the government and starts the revolution.
Okay.
Which lasts for 4 years. And a major political pawn in the beginning was Nicholas and his family.
Okay.
And they got moved into rural Russia and then into Siberia, and they end up in the middle of nowhere, and unfortunately, this is where they are massacred on this date in 1918.
What happened with that?
The Central Committee of the Bolshevik government decided to get rid of them.
And then they just went in there and shot them?
Their guards were, there were 12 guards, they went in and shot all of the Tsar and his wife and 4 daughters and son and their servants that were with them. Yeah. So,
why were they executed? Just they were.
They were executed because he was the chief enemy of the people.
Okay. He was basically the main symbol of the previous way of
main symbol of the and there was a white as opposed to red, because the Red Army was the Communist Bolshevik army. The White Army was the Tsarist noble army. Okay. The army was getting closer and closer. They wanted to free the Tsar. The White Army was doing very well at this time, and the Bolsheviks panicked.
Okay.
And massacred.
Oof.
So there are lots of things that are added on to this. This is a horrible thing that happened to this family, and if they were a regular family, it would have been a horrible thing to happen to them too. But they weren't a regular family.
Yeah.
And Nicholas wasn't a regular guy. So there were rumors about some of them escaping. Those rumors have all now been put to rest through DNA work that was done about 10, 15 years ago, including taking the DNA of Prince Philip, who was one of the closest relatives of Nicholas and Alexandra. And so they know that they were all killed, and they had found their remains and everything else, and they've been interred in St. Peter and Paul's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, and that's where they laid to rest. They're laid to rest now. Now, because of the cult of personality tendency in Russia, Nicholas and Alexandra's story became like a cult of personality in itself. So they could do nothing bad. They were all good. They were the Tsar and Tsarita. They were the golden pair and everything else. Well, many people didn't like her because she was, quote, German, unquote. Yeah. Well, she was about as German as I am, about a third. Her grandmother was Queen Victoria, you know.
But she had come from Germany.
But so she had come from a little German duchy, and she was, you know, she hooked up with Rasputin and other strange people in the court and everything else, and no one liked her, and so on and so forth. Well, now, of course, after the massacre and after the revolution and what happened, you know, people, they put her up on a pedestal. Yeah. And they put him up there too. Yeah. In all logic and common sense, did they belong up there as a good ruling couple? Probably not. Did they have a good marriage? They did. They wrote love letters to each other until the day they died. And they were good to their children, you know, and but the question that everybody asks me all the time is,
why are they saints?
Why are they saints?
And are they actually saints? In this book, they're referred to as saints.
They are actually saints.
Okay, because on the OCA website, it said, like, most revered or something. It didn't say saints.
I know. They like to use words like that. But believe me, they're saints. They were canonized by the Russian Church in exile. In the 1970s, and they were canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago.
So why are they saints? What's the deal with that?
The legend that developed around them was that they were martyred for the church's sake.
Okay.
And that wasn't necessarily one of the top 10 reasons the Bolsheviks got rid of him.
Okay.
So a number of us who were historians, when we heard that he was going to be canonized, were going like, uh-oh. This is an area where the church has had trouble in the past with. This is not the first time this has happened.
A conflation of sort of national narratives.
My favorite one that goes back to is Saint Justinian and Saint Theodora. Do you know who they are?
I know the names, but
Justinian is the one who had Hagia Sophia built in the 530s, which we should talk about sometime. Theodora was his bear hunting, maybe courtesan wife.
Okay.
Who became empress. I mean, they got married and everything, but she was an item at court and everything else. But they became Saint Justinian and Saint Theodora.
Okay.
On the other side of the spectrum, we have Saint Nicholas and Saint Alexandra, who were political, and as far as leadership was concerned for their state, not, on the top 10.
Yeah.
But did they have a tragic story? They had a tragic story. But unfortunately, there were millions of tragic stories.
Yeah.
There was another tragic story directly connected with Alexandra. Her eldest sister that helped raise her, their mother died when she was young, married one of Nicholas's uncles, Serge, and she was widowed in 1905 when her husband was assassinated by the revolutionaries. He had been the governor of Moscow. And she left the royal family and founded a nunnery that basically became a hospice. And she gave away all of her money and became a nun.
Now that sounds more in line with a lot of the other stories of saints that I've heard.
Yeah, then that's more like normal. She was imprisoned in July, same month that her sister was imprisoned, and was killed along with a couple of her relatives too. And her body is now in Jerusalem.
Oh.
But she follows more of a martyr's line. She had a monastic vocation. She followed through on that. She helped the people. She was not a royal monastic. She was a monastic who just happened to be royal.
Okay.
Whereas Alexandra is not a martyr who happens to be royal. She is a royal martyr.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I wonder if it's something. It's like that's a condensed symbol.
Well, she became a symbol, but the problem remains is that even if you took away Rasputin, she was a political mess. I mean, she and he really tried to rule together and everything, and they did things together, which a married couple should do. But unfortunately, neither of them did politics very well and nation building very well.
Yeah.
And choosing choosing the ministers very well. Then none of this was done very well. I mean, it was most of it was a poor job. And then, of course, they were living in the worst of times for royalty.
Yeah.
11 royal houses fell in World War I. They had ministers who were wonderful, who were assassinated, who were helping the people. You could say, well, it's a string of bad luck. If I don't believe in luck, I don't believe in strings anywhere. But there is a connection here. They became a legend. And then the legend was canonized.
Which I guess is maybe, I mean, there are saints that honey, if you just open it up and hold that volume button all the way down. Apologies, folks, I forgot to mute my phone and and then push the center button. I'm not usually this popular. There are stories of saints that I've read that they basically know nothing about their lives and they invent a hagiography.
Yes, there
sort
are.
of
There are saints that are like that. There are saints who are who make major changes in their life. Elizabeth, Saint Elizabeth, didn't make major changes in her life initially, but then she did. She lived like she was a nun.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of it in terms of like if it's hard because with like stuff like that, it's like the story is more important than what we would think of as fact in a way. With these saints that you don't really know, and it's like they dig up a something and then like,
you know, they sometimes you read in saints books, you know, like these saint martyrs stories of female nuns all sound alike. It's because they unfortunately were rewritten by the same person.
Yeah, it's like they don't really know anything.
But that's not what's going on here. We're dealing with someone that died in 1918 that we have film of. You know, we have their DNA. We have their whole. We have the whole package. Should they be saints? I'm not going to say whether they should be saints or not. Are they saints? Yes, they are saints.
Yeah.
The church canonized them. Should the church canonize other people too? Yes, it should. You know, we have a number of them in the offing for us here in America. One of whom is a Native American.
That's awesome.
Which would be nice to have another one of those. We already have two.
Yeah.
So, but we have to be careful. We can't say, well, they're not saints because they didn't live a saintly life in these areas. Well, you could really run into trouble with that. Yeah, that you can run into some bad trouble on both sides. You can go on one way or the other way and go too far. You know, so that's basically their story. There was a long, you know, like I said, there was a long legend about their youngest daughter escaping Anastasia and escaping to Poland, and then, you know, the woman that played her. I mean, they made a movie of this Anastasia with Ingrid Bergman. Playing Anastasia. And they finally found out in 1992 they had a kidney of this woman. They had kept it for some reason.
That's not morbid at all.
It's really not morbid. But luckily they did, and they did the DNA on it and found out that she was a Polish person. So it wasn't Anastasia.
So that story fell by the wayside.
So that story fell, that legend, which became a Hollywood movie, fell by the wayside. Yeah. You
mean everything Hollywood tells us isn't true, Father?
Oh, especially about saints and royalty and everything else. And oh boy,
guess I'll have to hang up my Iron Man suit.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not. Now Iron Man's different. That's different. But
well, thanks.
So there's lots of examples on empresses and emperors becoming saints. But there are millions and millions of more examples of people just like you and me who became saints.
Yeah.
You know, and who are saints.
Yeah.
And then it didn't become saints.
They weren't canonized as such.
They weren't canonized, but they were saints. You know, so.
Well, maybe we'll root up some of them and have them on as guests at some point.
Well, you never know. We'll talk about them and have some icons of them and everything else.
Well, thanks. That, I think, was a nice kind of rabbit trail to go down. And I know it's always fun to pick your brain about the history stuff, especially the Russian history, since that's kind of your wheelhouse. And something that at least I didn't really know a lot about. It happened to be today. And I just found it to be interesting, these people that lived in also times of deep unrest and upset, and what happened to them, and how the church has elevated them for whatever reason.
You know, they were, and we have to look at, you know, what happened in their world. They not only World War I, but their entire life was destroyed.
Yeah.
And then Russia went through a 5-year revolution. And then Stalin came along and killed 30-odd million in the Gulag, and then the country went through World War II. So you have to sort of look at, you know, in the in the last 100 or so years of what's happened to the what we now know as the Russian Empire.
Yeah.
Talk about things going back and forth and being insane and crazy and apocalyptic. They certainly lived through that.
Yeah.
And the church remains.
It does.
Like it has been for 1,020 years.
Yeah,
in Russia.
Well, when did St. Vladimir?
988.
988? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time. Any parting shots?
No parting shots.
No
today.
parting shots
Sorry.
today? That's all right.
But it's good to be with you here in hot, steamy Philadelphia.
It is, isn't it?
It is steamy.
We're wearing long sleeves, like.
Right, I'm wearing black, and
Yeah. Well, guys, thanks as always for joining us. We will see you on the next episode. We'll see where we get. And until next time, as always, catechumens depart.